So I'm going to talk about the 5 general recommendations in the item. The first 2 really just reinforce some of the recommendations that were made through the Educator Excellence Task Force. We felt that that the recommendations around steps that the state should be taking to increase the diversity of the teacher workforce were important enough that even though it was not necessarily in our purview as a panel, we wanted to emphasize how important we felt those recommendations were. So recommendations number 1 and 2 really are just our kudos to the Educator Excellence Task Force and the recommendations that it made. Recommendation number 3 deals with recommending some updates to the preliminary multiple and single subject teacher preparation program standards. As Terry mentioned, some of this work is already underway, particularly the alignment between the Common Core state standards and the teaching performance expectations. And I think there's also an alignment process underway between the program standards and the Common Core state standards. But we feel like in addition to those important activities, because the work of SB 2042 is now 15 years old, there is so much more that's happened in the state. There's so much more that's happened in research. There's our thinking about teacher preparation is much more developed. And in terms of the panel discussion, we felt like there were 4 major domains where additional content should be considered to be added to the multiple and single subject program standards. And these would be content around educational equity. Our demographics in the state are changing. We have sort of different sensibilities and ideas about what equity might mean, broadening some of the definitions beyond student characteristics into perhaps things about families or communities. And also we've suffered, several recurrent fiscal crises that sort of make the equity issues more and more prevalent for us in education. We feel like with the advent of the Common Core and the increased demands in terms of oral and written language in particular, there needs to be just a very explicit presence of academic language development throughout different domains of the program standards. And probably somebody's texting right now while I'm talking, so we know the 21st century is here, and along with it, linked learning. And so there's so much that's happened technologically that we feel like, and technologically, which has had impacts on how workplaces are organized, how school spaces are organized, social relations. So the domains that we identify in the report around the 21st century knowledge and the ideas of linked learning, we also feel like should be more reflected in the program standards. And finally, responsiveness to students. This actually relates to ideas that I think are prevalent out in the field around relationships and relevance, but also this particular item will sort of circle back to when we get to recommendation 31. And it really it addresses sort of the kinds of knowledge bases, skills, and dispositions that a general educator should have when working with students who have particular or special needs, whether they're diagnosed or not, whether they're part of a plan or not. So that is item 3. Item 4 pertains to some restrictions that are currently placed on preliminary post-baccalaureate student teaching preparation programs in the multiple and single subject domains. It was the contention of the panel that because of so much new content being expected for a novice teacher to learn and come to some sort of level of mastery appropriate for their stage of development, some of the reports that have been published about best practices in teacher preparation, particularly with regard to clinical preparation, it was the panel's contention that placing a 1-year restriction on the delivery time for programs really tied the hands of many programs and sort of forced them to make choices between equally important elements to include in their programs. So our recommendation is to take that limit off. And finally, the panel did spend some time reviewing the educator preparation program standards to try to see if there were any particular kinds of delivery models that were privileged over others. So did the standards language assume a primarily face-to-face model? Was there room in the standards to both account for, provide evidence of, and hold accountable programs that were not using a traditional model but had migrated into more of a hybrid or face-to-face or blended kind of program. And our conclusion was, in fact, that the program standards are written in such a way that because the focus is on a program providing evidence, they can provide evidence from their online components, from their face-to-face components, from their hybrid components, and that their onus is really on the Committee on Accreditation, in addition to the program, to provide evidence to document that the standards were being met. So there was not a conclusion that there needed to be any sort of special dimension to the standards, special language to the standards around delivery models. The other thing, actually, Paige is looking at me, so the other thing that we basically concluded with respect to item number 5 is the time that it would take us to write standards around online or blended or hybrid programs. In that time, whatever technology we were trying to focus on would probably have morphed, 5 generations from the point in which we started. So it would just be kind of a difficult race to keep up with. But that was, I think, a secondary consideration to the fact that we felt like the standards did not currently provide an advantage or a disadvantage to any particular type of delivery model.
So I think the agreement is, rather than take questions with each cluster, we're going to plunge ahead and take all the questions at the end. Just before I start, I want to reiterate what Pia said about what a privilege it's been to work with this group of panelists and staff. Truly dedicated group, really interested in understanding each other, even while everyone brought a point of view. So it's been a great experience. The next cluster is about credentials, subjects, and authorizations. The emphasis across this set of recommendations is to reflect, in part, to reflect changes to policy that better reflect what is actually occurring in schools, as well as things that are identified that perhaps are not being addressed but need to be. So if I look at the first 2 standards here about grade level changes in spans, the proposal here is to restrict what is currently K-12, a K-12 formulation for credentials. So a single subject credential allows you to teach that subject K-12, and a multiple subject credential allows you to teach multiple subjects in self-contained environments K-12. And our proposal suggests restricting that so that the 4 core single subjects are restricted to a 5-12 range, and that the multiple subjects, the typical multiple subjects credential is restricted to a K-8 range. This allows programs to focus somewhat more narrowly on the developmental needs of students in those different ranges. So that is the first set of recommendations. And then in terms of the content area changes, there are a set of suggestions here about some subjects that are not currently authorized as single subject credentials that we recommend ought to be, and some consideration of asking people from the field in the sciences to reconsider how the science credentials are assigned and distributed. And then finally, recommendation number 11 is really in many ways necessary to support recommendations 6 and 7, where there needs to be some ability to then create special emphases on early childhood education or on middle school levels, as well as bridge emphases as the new configuration comes online as the result of action on those recommendations. So I will hand it back to you.
So I'm going to talk now about the recommendations that pertain to our next big category, which is preliminary teacher preparation. And the first recommendation in this category is recommendation number 12, and it has to do with how multiple subject candidates demonstrate content knowledge. There is one option available in the state now, and that is for a multiple subject candidate to take the California subject exam for teachers. For single subject candidates, they actually have two options. They still can complete a subject matter waiver program, which is something like the equivalent of a bachelor's degree with some extra courses in the content area. And they can also take California subject exams for teachers in their particular content area. And it's the recommendation of the TAP panel that we help achieve some level of equity and parity across the two different kinds of credentials, and that we reinstitute something that we had prior to a decision made by the State Board of Education, and reinstitute the subject matter waiver program for the elementary credential candidates so that they can demonstrate subject matter knowledge through a degree program that's been approved by the Commission as meeting the multiple subject content areas. I think we have a number of different rationales. There was some strong support for this across the IHE folks as well as the employers for this move. I think there's some concern about the extent to which an exam represents deep subject matter knowledge, particularly as the multiple subject or the elementary curriculum moves into the Common Core world, where conceptual understanding, performance-based assessments will become, we hope, more of the reality of an elementary school day. Items 13 and 14 deal with the field experience component of a teacher preparation program. And here we are very much in support of the recommendations made by the EETF report, Greatness by Design, on the subject of field experience. We conducted a survey of stakeholders, or actually program sponsors, and found a very wide variation across programs in terms of how they met the standards for field experience. And it was the contention of the panel that the standards should be the standards for field experience should be revised so that there's a lot clearer direction and more explicit language around what the field experience should look like, its duration, the types of activities that might occur during that important component of a program. And in addition, the tangential piece to that would also be more explicit information about the qualifications, training, support, mentoring for the university supervisor and the cooperating teacher, important components of the field experience. For items 15 and 16 and 17, we were looking at the topic of performance assessments, and these are required of all candidates exiting a credential program. And we felt that and I believe this is already happening, but with the revision of the teaching performance expectations, there needs to be a concurrent revision of the teaching performance assessment so that there's an alignment between the desired outcomes and how they are evaluated. In addition, there needs to be from the Commission more clarity about the process of conducting the teaching performance assessment, particularly with regard to the issue of feedback. So what kind of support and feedback do candidates get as they're preparing to submit or to take their summative assessment? And finally, we'd like to see some kind of more explicit bridge between the teacher preparation program and the induction program around the issue of the assessment of different kinds of competencies. So something concrete that goes from one program to the next, candidates in the middle, and sort of has a professional development plan based on assessments of their strengths and weaknesses in the preparation program, and leads into a targeted plan of support in the induction program. Oh, I'm still talking.
One more.
Okay. Items 18 through 21 deal with online and blended teaching, and we're going to circle back to an item that is going to sound like this later on in our presentation, and we're actually making a fairly clear distinction here. So this deals with the knowledge base and skills that candidates acquire while they're in teacher preparation programs to teach or to offer a portion of their instruction in an online or blended environment. More and more that's the case. Students access the PowerPoint from their teacher, at night when they're trying to study, or they go look at their grades at a minimum. And then we have, online and blended programs that may be the bulk of the kind of instruction that students receive. So we would like the standards to be updated so that they're more reflective of the K-12 realities around online and blended teaching, and so that that we are sure that all candidates leave their teacher preparation programs with some basic skills in how to deliver this instruction in an effective and responsible manner. We did have some fairly active discussion around item 20, and this is where I think the room sort of got divided between the Gen Xers and everybody else, and some wannabes, which is probably the category I'm in. And again, like the item related to program delivery, at what point do you say, well, this is an online program or this is not an online program? So we sort of drew a very stark line in the sand and said, when your program is 100% delivered in a virtual environment, then you have an online program, and our recommendation for that kind of program is that there be a specific authorization so that the instructors, the educators who are teaching in that kind of a program, 100% virtual, not face-to-face, that they clearly have demonstrated the expertise and the pedagogical skill to deliver effective instruction in that environment.
So shifting then to the intern early completion option, this is a policy that's quite specific to candidates who are entering an intern program, and it allows them to demonstrate, really in this case through a particular assessment, their readiness to not have to complete every aspect of the program, and to take the teacher performance assessments and so on and earn their credential. We, as the panel, recognized the purpose and the value of a policy like this, that there may in fact be candidates who have a certain requisite set of knowledge and skills that would suggest that aspects of the preparation program may not be necessary or benefit them, and that there should be some way to demonstrate that and have a revised program. Two things that we think need to be considered in taking that policy forward. The first is the assessment itself. Currently, the assessment is an exam called the Teaching Foundations exam, and there was a strong feeling that that's not a very accurate measure of skills and knowledge of teaching, and so therefore passing that exam is probably not a good indicator that the person doesn't need to be engaged in aspects of the program. And I believe that that particular recommendation is actionable by the commission alone, to suggest revising and rethinking what that assessment might be. The second part, which requires some work by the legislator, is that there also needs to be the ability for better differentiation in determining what aspects of the program a candidate, based on their demonstrated abilities and skills and prior experience, would be required to participate in or not. And I think the assumption here is that a candidate who comes in with prior knowledge and experience may still have particular areas. I have demonstrated experience and knowledge in teaching generally, but I haven't worked with English learners. And the program a program or some other method could be used to determine, well, then there's aspects of the program that you would not have to participate in because they aren't necessary for you, and there's other aspects given your particular set of knowledge and skills that might be required. And so the current policy doesn't allow for that type of differentiation in evaluating an early completion candidate. And so this recommendation seeks to provide that flexibility. And I want to be clear that these recommendations don't lower the bar on anybody. It wouldn't allow more people to qualify for early completion than currently do, but it would allow flexibility to raise the bar in terms of identifying specific skills that a candidate needs.
I'd like to talk now about recommendation number 25, which is in relation to Assembly Bill 1304, which established that there should be a recognition of study for folks with linked learning expertise, knowledge base, and skills. So recognition of study is not a credential, and it's not an authorization, but it is a mechanism to recognize a special set of skills, experiences, and expertise that a teacher may have. And since the legislation sort of propels this idea into this venue here, the TAP panel recommended that the commission work on developing a set of standards that would define what the linked learning knowledge set and skill set is for teachers who are seeking that recognition of study.
So the next cluster of recommendations have to do with induction, earning a clear credential. And all of these flow from the starting assumption that the two-tiered approach that we have in California is a sound approach, and that the notion of having an induction phase is the right idea. And our recommendations are around clarifying or strengthening aspects of that approach. And so the first recommendation 26 really relates to recommendation 17 that Pia already discussed about a better system that programs can have some control over of communicating between the preliminary preparation program to the induction program about a particular candidate's skills, areas for growth as they come out of the preliminary preparation program. Then there's some clarification or extension or increased rigor around what are the expectations for participation in induction programs. There are recommendations here about the assessment component, the ability for programs to really, a requirement for programs to define the skills that need to be demonstrated to earn a clear credential and abilities to meaningfully assess those skills as part of earning a clear credential. And then finally, there's the question of infrastructure. And the consensus of the panel is that the statewide infrastructure that supports induction programs has been beneficial. And the environment is changing, we recognize, and but there's a strong feeling that we need to examine what has been effective about that structure. There are aspects of that should be preserved and even extended as a means to support the implementation of other programs, not only induction programs.
So we're going to move now into the additional recommendations section, and there were a couple moments during our time together where we might get an email from one of the commission staff, and I'd think, wait, was that in the charge? Or there were just very, clearly important related issues, and you can't think of everything, at the onset. And so the additional recommendations, these aren't, afterthoughts or also bins or second runs. They're really some of the issues that sort of emerged over the course of the work that seemed significant enough that we wanted to do some research, do some thinking, and deliberate over them. Obviously, special education is just a very, very important topic, even for a panel that's looking at single and multiple subject credential programs. And we spent a lot of time really thinking about our charge and then sort of what was appropriate for the panel to deliberate on and make recommendations on with respect to special education. And I think there's a couple of things that we're trying to accomplish with the recommendations under item 31. I think in some ways we're asking for some revisions to both sets of, or all three sets of standards as specialist, and then also multiple and single subject standards, so that those standards better reflect some of the best practices that we see happening in schools at this particular time, and simultaneously that we actually create a vision for how that very good work could sort of move even further and then be a little bit more ubiquitous than it is right now, so that we would see examples of co-teaching or inclusive practices, for example, in sort of most classrooms across the state. So that's a little bit of the flavor of how we approached coming to the content and the language of item 31. Some of the specific things related to item 31 also were envisioned to provide employers with more flexibility. And I think the bottom line for item 31 is really, can we prepare general education teachers and special education teachers so that however they're assigned in the workplace, the needs of students are best met. And I think that was sort of the underlying idea here for item 31.
So moving on to professional responsibilities, this set of 3 recommendations is actually quite straightforward, so it's an easy one to discuss. It addresses the concern that teachers may or may not know what their professional responsibilities and prohibitions are. So the recommendations suggest that we, the commission, should be clear about what those are, that those should be communicated, and that teachers should affirm that they're aware of those responsibilities and prohibitions.
For item 35 and 36, I think we were very excited by the recommendations from the EETF, and so there's an echo here of some of the recommendations in EETF about the idea of designing greatness and designing effectiveness. So item 35 is a recommendation for those entities as appropriate, California Department of Education and others, to create a master plan for professional learning. I think there's a couple of key concepts here. We were very, very deliberate. We went back and forth, very deliberate about the word learning versus professional development, and we wanted to really underscore this idea of, supporting and applauding the state of California in really making concrete the idea of a teaching profession and all of the things that attend to that. I think we wanted to extend what we feel like is our solid bones with the 2042 structure, but sort of extend now into those in-service years. So post-induction, can we help organize on some level, still preserving sort of choice and, individual preferences and that kind of thing, but can we extend into the in-service years some sort of vision that makes concrete what the expectations are for the teachers that are part of their profession in our state. And then concurrent with that is item 36. I should probably note, of all the items in the survey, this one maybe stands out as one that didn't get overwhelming support from the field. We feel there's probably room for exploration as to why some of the negative results came through. We think maybe people had memories of a past experience where they had to sort of prove their professional hours and didn't find that it was as meaningful as perhaps had been envisioned. And I think if you couple this idea of a master plan for professional learning, where there really, we hope, would be significant and meaningful and authentic ways for teachers to improve their knowledge base and skill, then perhaps we'd get a different kind of response to item 36 if the field were to be surveyed.
The statewide survey item responds to that there's a lack of information about the people working in the field, and so it suggests that we collect information both for those leaving programs as they earn their initial certification and on renewal, so that we're able to track over a career cycle some information about what's happening in the teaching profession. And the piece of that about individuals who are leaving programs now is currently being piloted. So some actions already taking place on that. And the suggestion is that that get codified and extended so that we can get a lot more and better information about the teaching profession.
Item 38 probably needs not a lot of explanation. These are still difficult fiscal times, and it was the recommendation of the panel that the commission work on creating a fee structure for some of the work that it does around credential renewal that better reflected the costs of making those renewals happen.
Teacher leadership and career ladders for educators was a major focus and section of the Greatness by Design reports. The panel could not come to consensus around ideas as far-reaching as what was in the EETF report. That said, there is consensus that it is in fact an important area to consider, and that a starting place is to try to define what are the distinct sets of knowledge and skills and dispositions that we want teacher leaders, emerging instructional leaders to have, and that the discussion and deliberation should continue around if that, once those are defined, should there be ways to add an emphasis to an existing credential or new credentials that would be a response to that set of skills, knowledge, and dispositions.
When we started to organize our presentation, neither Paige nor I could quite believe that we would have 40 minutes worth of information to share with you, but apparently we did.
We did?
Yes.
It's been 40 minutes?
Yeah. So we get to recommendation number 40. And this, again, is, this was not in the original charge of the TAP panel, but I think in our discussion about teaching performance assessments and really trying to create a robust system of professional learning, it seemed that it would be irresponsible to leave out some sort of recommendation related to an important piece of the school and classroom dynamic, which is the site principal, the preliminary administrative services credentials. So our recommendation here, and I think it echoes something in Greatness by Design, is to have a performance assessment that accompanies that credential as well.